So thank you all for coming this evening. I appreciate it. I know some of you, but from my work with the AIA on the research committee and my liaison work on the clinical committee, where we've been very busy. My background is I was introduced in aromatherapy when I was a BSN nurse, and we were going to magnet designation. And we were missing empirical nursing research as one of the checkboxes for that designation. That just prompted a whirlwind of educational journey for me. I pursued my master's in nursing and integrative nursing, and then a doctorate in health administration, with my dissertation focused on using aromatherapy at the bedside to promote nurses' sustainability in the workforce, having that reenactment of presence and touch and things like that. So with my doctoral level degree in this facility, it was a 700-bed hospital outside of Philadelphia, I was asked to be part of the institutional review board. So I served as a member of the committee. And while I was there, not only did I conduct research using the IRB in academia with my degree, but also within the hospital system. We did a study on vein visualization and using essential oil, and it's been the study has been repeated, and which is very exciting for me when you see that. But that's been my experience, and with that, Bruce had asked me if I'd be interested in contributing to this. So this is the outline for tonight. What is an IRB? The historical background is really important because it really is going to describe the development of how we got to where we're
Susan,
at.
can you move to the next slide, please?
I can. Is it moving for you?
No, just click on the number 2 slide.
I'm already on 3, so let me back out.
We're just still seeing slide 1.
Oh my goodness. I'm about.
Whoops.
Okay. So we're going to go through the IRB description, what needs approval, what types of approval there are, because there is a variety, what that IRB process and the readiness to present, the researcher requirements, and then what happens after approval. So the IRB, also known as an independent ethics committee, reviews research involving human subjects to ensure that there's ethical conduct and compliance with a set of regulations that are focused on really protecting the rights and the welfare of participants. And how did we get there, that this process is in place? So the recognition of the need of guidelines dealing with human subjects emerged following the Nuremberg trials, when we knew about the audacity of medical experimentation abuses by in the Nazi concentration camps. This led to the creation of the Nuremberg Code back in 1945, which was the first legal attempt to deal with those ethical issues in modern research. As biomedical research efforts expanded, the international need for a more specific code of ethics was then founded almost 20 years later in the Declaration of Helsinki. So if you look at this timeline from that point on, in 1953, the US and the NIH required that all proposed clinical research projects at its center in Bethesda obtain approval from a protection of human subjects review panel. So it was done at a very high level. In '66, the US Public Health Services issued its first set of regulations that extended review requirements to all extramural research supported by the agency. And then from 71 to 74, these rules were further revised that led to the establishment of what we now know as the IRBs at hundreds of institutions that receive federal funding for research. In '72, public disclosure of 30-year government supported the Tuskegee syphilis study, in which 300 Black rural men were left untreated for diagnosed syphilis after effective antibiotics became available. And this then prompted public law 93-348, calling for the establishment of this national Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects in Biomedical and Behavioral Research. As recent as '79, the Commission published further recommendations known as the Belmont Report. And this then served as the basis for revised federal publications in the Federal Register in '79, subsequently revised several times, resulting in the current Code of Federal Regulations, Title 45, Part 46, effective in 1991. So the Belmont Report really established those three general ethical principles that continue to be applied in the research of human subjects. And these are all probably familiar with you, but beneficence is the maximized benefits for science, humanity, and research participants, and to avoid or minimize risk to harm, respect, to protect the autonomy and privacy rights of participants, justice to assure the fair distribution among persons and groups of the costs and benefits of the research. And you can find, I put some links here if you wanted to look further into that report. So what we established is what we think of as internal IRB bodies. And this is an administrative body that was established to protect rights and welfare of human research subjects, recruited to participate in research activities conducted under the auspices of the institution with which is affiliated. So in a very large medical facility, certainly in academia, they have their own institutional review boards. There is also usually a designated IRB when there's doctoral programs, PhD programs available that have to support their students. I worked in a system that had one IRB for the entire health system. So there's variations of how to conduct that and have that available to those for researchers. There's also multi-site. They can be single or central site IRBs. One can review all sites, while central one is a single board that reviews multiple sites, as I just described. And this is used by organizations like the NIH that is doing massive levels of research processes. And so they streamline the process that we're going to describe. So who is the IRB? It's not a person, but under the common rule, it must be at least 5 members and include the following: at least 1 scientist, 1 non-scientist, 1 member who is not otherwise affiliated with the institution and who is not part of the immediate family of a person who is affiliated with the institution. They really want that outlier to be part of that decision-making for the approval process. There is an IRB chair who must complete additional education to oversee and facilitate the IRB and its roles and responsibilities. And what does that include? So an IRB leader, at mine, it was the ICU intensivist in one setting, leads the meetings. They chair them, they direct discussions, they ensure procedural processes followed. They preview applications and determine if they can go through what we're going to review as an expedited review. They approve protocols that meet regulatory requirements. So they're looking at the protocols for the function of not only the IRB, but protocols that are coming in to be reviewed for research. They ensure compliance, meaning that the IRB is complying with the regulations, the state laws, and in some places, university policy. They recruit members, which I was one of. They recruit, appoint, and provide orientation to their members at the process of what happens. They are really a liaison between the IRB and the research community. So information that's gathered maybe at one site is then elevated to a broader group with their findings and information in terms of what types of studies they're doing, for example. They respond to investigations, to local and federal investigation information. They train their members how to design and lead training for the IRB members. They provide consultation to investigators. And this is most important. I found, especially as a first time doing formal research, having that IRB staff and the chair available to provide guidance and as you go through this process. Additional responsibilities, there's a reporting structure. that goes up to, the federal government oversees. There's a lot of documentation that's kept. They have to make sure their members are qualified and fulfill their obligations, especially in terms of the roles that are met, requirements. They assure that the IRB is immune to pressure, and they are evaluated annually on their performance. And they also have to consider the fiscal impact on the organization, the time allotment required, the cost allotment required to do trials or clinical trials or testing of equipment and validation. So that's all part of their role and responsibility as that lead. So functions of the IRB, first and foremost, they review research proposals to assess potential risk and benefits to participants, and that's the hallmark of their role. Ensuring that research is conducted ethically and that participants' rights are protected. Their compliance with regulation. They ensure that the studies adhere to federal regulations, institutional, again, other relevant guidelines, and protecting human subjects. Their primary functions, as I said, is safeguarding the well-being and rights of individuals participating in research, including ensuring that the informed consent is very detailed and very much a large part of your proposal. The content is aligned with everything that I just described, and the minimization of potential harm. So they also monitor research. And we'll talk about that in the process and the after approval function of the researcher. But they don't always only review the proposals before they begin, but they monitor ongoing research to ensure that there's continued compliance with ethical standards in research. So what typically happens is the chair will receive the application for the research and then usually designate it to someone who is somewhat familiar with that study type or the content that's being reviewed, just to do that initial oversight prior to the meeting where it's presented to everyone for that approval process. The informed consent, I would say, is probably the most tedious part. It is a comprehensive review of what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, who's going to participate, and then all of the leveraging of protection. If there is any kind of type of reward for participating, all of that has to be very clearly spelled out, and that is hallmark in allowing a subject or participant to engage in your research project, having that signed off and witnessed. Fair subject selection. The IRB also plays a vital role in promoting fair subject selection, that it's equitable, avoiding exploitation or undue burden on a specific group. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that. What does require IRB approval? So it's generally required for research involving human subjects. Includes collecting data through surveys, interviews, and observations, and using identifiable private information or biospecimens. That being said, when you think about surveys, that's usually a lower level, and that's where we'll get into the types of IRB approvals and what the rigor that you have to go through for the approval process. So what triggers the IRB process? So the review is required for projects that meet the federal definition of research, which is a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation designed to develop or contribute to the generalizable knowledge. I'll tell you, I've sat on several doctoral dissertation committees, and I always say this: everybody wants to research like how to feed the world, and really all you need to do is figure out maybe how to feed the family down the street, because that's always, research is always going to contribute to that body of knowledge, and hopefully spur on that ideation to further investigate, and build off that research. So while it can seem like an enormous process, it has such great value, as we know when we're reviewing literature in the research committee, knowing that is part of the content of that publication, that they went through this process, is usually part of a publication requirement, that you followed all the correct steps and you've covered all your bases in terms of the ethical approach to it. So human subjects, it's an important component because there is some higher level of authority and evaluation and approval process that goes on. So projects that involve interaction or intervention with living individuals or access to identifiable private information or biospecimens require IRB review. Note that there is a higher level or special consideration is required when you talk about what they consider protected humans, which are children, pregnant women, and prisoners. And psychiatric patients, I found out very quickly also, because their ability to consent is many times has to be assessed before they could provide that authorization to complete understand the informed consent, but then also sign off as their own legal representation. Student-led research that meets is another IRB process that meets federal regulatory definition of human subject research, also goes under the scrutiny of IRB approval. Oops. So we're going to go through some categories. The first is exempt. There's 3 categories: exempt, expedited, and full board review. So this category usually applies with minimal or no risk to participants, and it does not require the full IRB approval. The chair can review it and determine that it meets the requirements. The research on educational practices or educational curriculums is an example. Benign behavioral interventions with adult subjects, anonymous surveys or interviews on non-sensitive topics. So you can see where there's very little risk to the individual that makes them fall under this category. I will share with you that also that most importantly, when interacting with an IRB board or seeking that consultation, this determining the level of review status is one of the things that you really typically need to really review and determine where your research project falls. Not because there's differences in some of the behaviors in terms after the approval, but just knowing what the expectation is as you prepare for it. So next, expedited review is faster than a full board review and is used for research involving, again, minimal resist reviewed by a designated IRB member or staff, such as collection of data from voice, video, digital, or image recordings, studies involving collection of hair or saliva samples, or research on an individual or group characteristics or behavior. These would be an expedited review, but still the IRB is part of that review and process. Full review is what we think about like drug clinical trials, things like that. And this is the most rigorous process used for research that poses more than minimal risk. When we think about side effects, for example, of a new drug trial, there automatically is risk associated and requires the convened meeting of the full IRB review. So I talked about investigational drugs or devices, procedures that cause significant physical or psychological harm, studies involving deception, research involving genetic testing, research that is complex designs requiring the expertise of multiple board members to evaluate. And then those involving vulnerable populations. We talked about children, pregnant women, also fetuses, prisoners, individuals with mental impairments that I described, which is one of the studies that I did, and research involving individuals with diminished autonomy, which I was working with a geriatric population, and that's where the last 2 kind of fell in those categories. I wanted to bring this forward because the research committee actually had some discussion around someone wanting to do a research project looking through our grant process. And one of the issues was they did not have availability of an IRB. So I did some research for the committee looking at one of the companies that is an outside service that will do for a fee, and you can see the fee structure there, will review your project. They conduct an external IRB, but they go through the information you see here, looking at your protocol, your study materials, review of the principal investigator with whom the consent form, review of the client requested pre-board review and investigator documentation, and then additional informed consent, obviously layering on quite a bit of money, but it did give us the opportunity to think about for those of us who want to conduct research but are no longer affiliated either with a university or an organization that has that ability to support it, there is an outside source. So let's think about IRB readiness and the preparation of an submission process. So the first is, as I said, determining that review type. At what level do you need to begin? And really it begins with what is your thought of what you want to research? And you have to bring together what's that process going to look like? Who is it going to be participating? What exactly is your methodology of what you're going to do? What are you going to measure? What is their risk? You know, you really have to think collectively what that information is to be able to move forward before you can really present that to a committee and say, you know, what level do I need of approval? You have to complete the city program, and I'll talk about a little bit about that, which is it includes very much the information I just shared with you, the historical component of the why. We have an IRB process and the components of it, of what it is, how it functions, and what your responsibilities are. This is a free program, but it is a requirement to conduct research. Gather your documents, obviously. Typically, most organizations have an electronic system for uploading information. And then you go through that initial screening that an IRB staff, especially when I was in both of the settings I was in, were more than willing to support you at looking at making sure you had all the documentation, your ideation's on paper or has been submitted. And they will then give you recommendations on what you need to do or edits that you need to change before you take it to either a formal IRB member to review and approved in the exempt status or non that lower level, middle level, and then if it has to go to full board review. So this is the Human Subjects Research City program. Again, it allows, it gives you, and I'm going to be tested on my memory. Once you apply for this, it does have a period of time that it is in effect if you're a researcher. You can, for the renewal process, but it is free of charge, and it does give you, it does require you review modules and test take to complete that process. So key criteria for IRB approval, minimizing risk. They must demonstrate as a researcher what steps they've taken to minimize those potential risks to the participant. And think about physical, psychological, social, and economic risks of involvement. Like if they have to show up at a place to participate or do an activity, does that represent an economic risk to them, and how are you remediating that? Reasonable risk in relation to benefits, the IRB will assess that, whether those potential benefits either to the participant or to society outweigh those risks. Informed consent. This is really the consent from each participant or legal representative. They understand the nature of the research, that it's usually multi-pages. I've seen clinical trials that are tens of pages, 20 pages long, because of the detail of risk and everything that has to be clearly outlined. The nature of the research, the risk benefits, and they're always their right to withdraw at any time. And equitable selections of participants. So there has to be a selection of participants, as I described, to avoid inclusion of a vulnerable population, unless there's a compelling reason in this study, and appropriate safeguards are in place for that. Safeguards to vulnerable populations, we've talked about that, but they would then have to be included to protect those rights and welfare. So if it involves children or patients with cognitive impairments, for example, that has to be clearly described. Privacy and confidentiality, they have to ensure there's privacy and confidentiality are protected through the study that include data storage and dissemination. So who and where is this information being locked in a file cabinet? Who's responsible for that? How is that data going to be disseminated once you collect it, analyze it, and want to report it? The next one is that there's adequate resources, including your proposal, including the staff and our funding to conduct it safely and ethically. And that sometimes is a hurdle, right? If you're looking at cost of equipment or supplies or time of staff that are going to act as part of your research not the part of the research study, but participating in securing those participants or doing the testing with them. The researcher competence is knowledge and skills, and that's covered in the city program completion. And again, data security, which I just talked about. Researchers must implement adequate measures to protect that confidentiality. So the readiness is really the process where the IRB office utilizes an initial pre-review screening process that during which there's an IRB analyst reviews each submission for completeness and compliance. They may ask the primary investigator to make changes to the submission before it's, as I described before, it goes to full review or further review. What does the timeline look like? These typically exempt take less than a week, but they can vary depending on how frequently the IRB meets and if revisions are requested. Expedited reviews can take up from 2 to 4 weeks, but again, vary on what that process is, the operational workflow of the IRB, because these are typically hospital employees that are represented there. And they have to have a quorum, obviously, to run the board meeting. Full board review can take longer, up to 2 months, depending on the complexity of the research, again, in the IRB. So that's important to consider when you're looking at something that you want to get to publication within a certain time frame. That this process is definitely gonna be part of that timeline before you even start collecting data. Completeness of the application, affecting timeline, research complexity, meeting schedule, the revisions, and of course, then the type of review. So if the study is conditionally approved, it's because the IRB has requested new information or justification of some aspect of the study rather than just changes that the board has directed the investigator to make. So they may seek outside person to review this for them as in a consulting kind of framework. In this case, the requested changes or new information will then be reviewed at the next IRB meeting, the board meeting. So you can see where this again is going to alter your timeline. But this happens occasionally when it's unique kinds of things. And the board itself is not familiar with the type of study. So what happened when I was asked to join, it was because we were doing more and more integrative studies with Reiki, with aromatherapy. We had a study going on with yoga. And so the IRB, which were traditional Western medicine prepared physicians, had no idea what this stuff was. And so they brought me in as an advanced holistic nurse and having my degree and asked me to be that kind of SME for some of these projects. So they didn't have to constantly go outside their realm to seek that information. So as a researcher, then you have to adhere to those ongoing requirements. They will not pass it unless you make those designated changes and recommendations. That include submitting amendments to the protocol changes, continuing review applications, and reporting, obviously, any incidents or adverse events once the research process begins. So next steps with approval. You obtain and save the approved materials. You want to keep your file it's very important to keep all your documentation, especially if there's any edits or amendments or recommendations. You keep that it's very important to keep all that data together. You can download and save, usually electronically, the approval. Go back to the approval package the IRB system may have for you, which has copies of the materials, especially consent forms and the approval letter itself, because they'll give the stamp of approval on that consent letter is one of the key items. Ensure you're using the stamped and approved versions of all the documents when interacting them with your participants or subjects. You only then can initiate and conduct research. Not on this looks good, you're good to go. You must have all that documentation in hand. Do not start before the approval. Don't begin any research activities involving human subjects until you have received the final IRB approval letter. and any other necessary institutional approvals. And then follow the approved procedure that you've outlined and adhere strictly to those procedures and protocols outlined in that approved protocol. I can't emphasize that enough because there's going to be ongoing responsibilities. It's not a one and done in this experience or process. So obviously any amendments that were recommended have to be resubmitted before implementation. They may give you an approval. I've seen where they've given an approval based on this amendment. You have to come back with that amendment and then again, keep that on hand. There's a continuous review that goes on. Most research studies required continual review or renewals, at least annually, to ensure an ongoing protection of human subjects. So they're going to want to know how you're doing with recruitment of participants and subjects. If you're what your data is showing, absolutely. If there's any adverse events, it's immediately they want to know about those. So in terms of timing, submit the continuing review application. There's forms, Form C is one of them, or equivalent, at least 30 days before the approval expiration date. So if you have difficulty getting to your, your saturation point of your qualitative data, or you just haven't been able to recruit enough subjects, you have to make sure that you are ahead of that expiration timeline, or after you have to desist or stop your data collection. The RB may require more frequent reviews for some study or may waive the requirements for others. Again, it depends on the risk, the population, and all of those complexities that add to the process. So here's some of them: reportable events, adverse events, unanticipated problems, breaches of confidentiality is important, that you have to go back and report to the IRB board. Closure, notify the IRB when all research, including data analysis, are complete, because they have to process that information as well within their reporting structure. Post-approval monitoring, be prepared for potential post-approval monitoring activities to ensure that compliance with the approved protocol. And as a brand new researcher, this isn't a bad thing, right? I think it just gives some oversight to making sure that these unique kind of new direction and new process is being honored carefully and being followed. If an incident occurs, an incident report basically has to go to the IRB as soon as possible, and then keep all records related to the study for relevant regulatory process. So they're locked and sustained. And the IRB will give you, I think it might be 5 years, they'll give you determination of when they can be shredded, because they can contain the subject's information, especially, right? Response follow-up: if your initial submission is improved with conditions, create a new package within your approved project to submit for authorization, or translated consent forms is another piece that sometimes are requested. Closure: when all is completed, submit a closure notification. And then if there's an electronic system, familiarize yourself with what that system is, and how to submit things properly so you don't miss a deadline or an upload for those continued reviews or any additional information that they're requesting. So some key takeaways. So they generally exist in sites that conduct research. So you're going to find them in academic healthcare scenarios, in universities that are aligned with healthcare organizations or with them in themselves when they're preparing students to do research. Their purpose is to really oversee the research to protect subjects and participants, and making sure that all regulatory needs are met. The IRB committee has to be diverse to secure both expert and community member input. The preparation is key before submission, and committee members wanted to support the successful approval of the presented research. You will be asked as the primary investigator to present in front of that, if you go to full board review, to be able to answer questions in real time, and if you, that non-member to the organization person is usually may not at all be familiar with what you're doing. So that process can take the whole review time of a board. So they typically go, the board will go through some quick updates or information that's been secured, or expedited. But then when there's full board review, that is usually that presentation. And that can be intimidating too to a new researcher. But again, finding that, that phone a friend person that's on the committee that can support you and walk through it is really, really helpful from personal experience. Research cannot begin until that letter of approval is received from the IRB. It doesn't end with approval, as we just described. Follow those guidelines that they set for you in terms of updates, reporting any incidents, that final report out to the full committee. They want to know how things worked out, especially in academic healthcare. There's so much involved in research development and really adding to that body of knowledge that they want to know what the outcomes is to contribute, and also share within the IRB committee chairs what they're doing and how some of those outcomes are proceeding. Research is the key element to build the body of knowledge. It's that evidence base that we work off of that really gives validation, and through replication of previous findings or exploring really brand new pathways of care delivery or functionality of essential oils, and experiences, at case study levels all the way up to, full studies. I'll share with you that right before I left Penn, I was involved with Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and talking about research in the area of integrative health, not just aromatherapy, but others. And they were developing and have developed their program. And the NIH actually, they brought someone to speak, and I was so impressed with their planning of accepting case study level review. We often think about research as these thousands of people, and going over years, like the one nursing study that's been going on since I was in my 20s, is one of those longitudinal research studies. But they agreed that, funding for these types of studies, the importance of them are high value to contributing to that body of knowledge. And they were opening up funding for very low level numbers and case study information to support that growth in this area of healthcare delivery. So research is in here. There's some great, the National Center of Advancing Translational Science. There's a toolkit, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. What are IRBs is another resource that you can always review for further information. And then the last slide, I have some questions. I wasn't sure if you want me to open them when I submitted them, or this is going to be part of the post CE kind of thing. So somebody guide me in that discussion.
It's part of the post CE that, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not going to show and tell them.
Yeah. You don't get to peek at them yet.
No,
Susan, thank you. That was very, very informative. We did have a question, Mimi, way back from Mimi, way back at the beginning about the required people who are on an IRB. So if you can slide way back up to almost the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And were there 3 people or 5 people? What was the
5 people?
5 people.
Hold on.
Way back up. Here we go.
Oh, that's lead meetings.
Yep.
Oh, I just passed it. 5 members, 1 scientist, 1 non-scientist, and then there's variations of those that attend, right? So you have 1 scientist, 1 non-scientist person. Typically, I'll show you that the framework of my IRB was the physician was the chair, the department lead. We had a neonatologist because there was a lot of research done in NICU in this healthcare facility. So he was the 1 scientist, another. So we had variation of that. The non-scientists could be social workers. They could be, we had pastoral care present, and they were affiliated with the organization. So it's a minimum of 5. Because of the diversity of the research that was being done, they knew areas, like we had an oncologist, because oncology clinical trials was very prevalent in this organization as well. So we had an oncologist, a neonatologist, the chair was an ICU intensivist, and then we had a pastoral care member, and we had a social worker who, when you think about, subject experience and some of those outlying things like economic burden. They would be very in tune to that and reviewing it. And then I was brought in as another scientist because of my background in integrative health, contributing that having knowledge of that type of review and information to ask those pertinent questions. And then the community member was actually was one of our former volunteers who was so intrigued by research. And you sit for, I think when you join, I think you sit for a minimum of 2 years because they're going to train you to participate, and they don't want a lot of in and out because it's a very integrated body that discusses these openly and challenges each other on information. So you really want that to be, have a really good synergy and a lot of energy. And so you give that at least 2 year commitment to be a participant, be one of the members. But yeah, we had a volunteer, and he would bring in such interesting information, and they would share with him sometimes prior to coming what the study they were going to review, so that he would do a little bit of his own research and come prepared to ask really appropriate questions, which was helpful. Okay, let me get this out of the way.
Does anybody have any questions? You're certainly welcome to turn your screens back on. Susan has stopped sharing. If you have any questions, please bring them forward. Bruce gives you
questions, but this was great, Susan. Thank you. That's I would love. Maybe I do have a question. Some of the studies that you mentioned that you worked on, if any of them are published anywhere, where could I find those?
Yeah, I can share with you. I did a study that was built off of Jane Buckle's study of one of her students using black pepper for vein visualization for phlebotomy. And when I taught aromatherapy to my nurses in this organization, I used that evidence as displaying there is evidence out there that's supporting it. And here's a study. I had an IV nurse, an IV team there, and she was like, "Why don't we have this? Why can't we have this?" So we did a black pepper study within there with my IV team. We had to train them on how to do the actual intervention. We had timers for patch testing. We used individual rollerball application for each patient. And we used the same scale that the original study used to identify the vein was not visible or palpable, visible or palpable, or visible and palpable, that they could then have better chances of actually starting the IV. The study was then replicated again out of the country, but referenced that mine because they used the same scale, but they not only measured vein visualization and palpation and their insertion rate, but they also measured nurses' experience with it. Like how did that improve their workday by having that resource available that enhanced their job, their intervention, and also the patient's lack of duress from multiple sticks.
I would love to see that. I'm a hard stick. They take 2 phlebotomists and 4 to 6 times to find a vein on me.
Black pepper. So the intention was the black pepper absorbing. I used aloe vera gel, and it was a 20% dilution. It was very concentrated, very purposefully placed anatomically where there should be a vein. They patch tested, obviously, because of the concentration. And they set a timer on the patch test to monitor it for like half an hour. And then they proceeded. But the intention was the black pepper would absorb below the skin level into the subdermis and heat from the bottom up instead of putting hot packs and everything. And the team validated that they avoided of their study. I think it ended up being 120 patients. We did a comparative yet with and without comparative, and that they avoided probably a dozen central line insertions by having that available to them. And note, this is pre-ultrasound availability. There was one in the hospital and it was kept in the ER. Nobody ever had access to it on the floors. So I will share, I don't know the best way to do that, but but I can certainly I'll share it through our clinical committee. I'll get those articles for you.
Great.
And Jane Buckle was, I reached out to her because it was her student. And so she got it published and not a nursing journal because she thought it extended the value to an interdisciplinary team. So it went into a larger facing journal of care. So that was kind of cool too. Yeah, that
That's
was my first big
fantastic.
publication.
I love that. That's fantastic because I'm currently
Thank you.
working
Thank
my
you for
way through a
asking.
psychology degree, and I'm for the first time I have an assignment I can use my aromatherapy in, so I'm really excited.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Bruce.
Uh, yeah, Sue, I have a question. As you know, aromatherapists who are not affiliated with an academic center have a hard time getting their stuff to a suitable IRB. So
Yes.
one of the
Or the one that
things
doesn't
that
cost a
I've
lot of money.
suggested is, why don't we just have an AIA IRB? And I was told that's impossible. What what do you think?
Because
Is it impossible, or is it something that we could do?
did that come as a flat statement or did they give reason why?
They gave some reasons why, but I've forgotten them.
That's okay. To go through the process of being assigned an IRB build, I don't know the financial commitment to that. I don't know that because they're providing another layer of oversight, right? So I'm sure that comes with some kind of fee structure. In terms of participation in it, though, I mean, we would need to think about who else other than this select group of scientists, right? How you would then bring in that non-member. I mean, you'd have to have somebody willing to be that non-member, but not to me, nothing is impossible. I think fiscally it might have some, oh, there's liability issues. Cynthia saying, yeah, we're such a biased group. It might you'd have to be, it could be because think about how would we remedy stuff happening in the field where at a hospital system you're there, you're prepared, you're managing it in its totality if something goes south or have an adverse event with stuff happening out in the community. It would be hard to have oversight and yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges to it, Bruce. My theory is ask. Get the details. Ask. I would go to the, I would, my other thought was, the NIH having this broad spectrum oversight. I know a lot of, I don't know, is IRB accessed through them? We've never explored that on the research committee. I wonder if that's a portal that we could explore as a resource. I don't know if there's cost associated with them or their involvement. Does it have to be part of their grant process awarding? I don't know. I don't know that level. I know when I was at Penn, we had a lot of NIH grants, but they were all IRB'd internally. I don't know that there was the option of getting that. What if someone has a clinic and it's done through that? Again, I think liability is the key to that. And they're going to tell us, they will dictate if it's possible based on what I would suspect as what we propose as a IRB committee option. They would simply let us know. I'll tell you a funny story. I've been chasing contact hour approval just for my company. I went through 14 different pathways to try to secure it because we sell product, even though the whole idea was education of my CNO group, not around sales at all. I couldn't get it for any reason because it's stipulated in everybody's state, association, academic, can't do it. But in presentations that I want to do for this group. So there are guidelines, there are strictness for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot with the control factors, but yeah, I would say maybe an option for this group is to think about what the NIH might offer oversight. Because that one that I showed here was so expensive. I mean, every step of your process has to be reviewed. I mean, you're spending thousands of dollars. It's not usually a first-time researcher. They don't have that. Even if they have some funding, you don't want to put all your funding into getting an approval. You're going to need it for supplies and, you know, whatever. Yeah. But nice,
Thank you.
great creative thinking there, Bruce. As always.
Any other questions? All right, then I'm going to stop the recording.
That wraps up today's session. Thanks for tuning into the AIA Research Academy. This academy exists thanks to the generous support of the Gaffasi Foundation and is here to make aromatherapy research fun, accessible, and relevant. Our mission is simple yet powerful: to educate, inspire, and connect a global community committed to advancing the science of aromatherapy. We envision a future where research is not just part of the conversation, but the culture. The best part, access is completely free. Simply sign up through the link in the description box below. And if you're an AIA member, the Academy is already part of your member benefits, putting powerful resources right at your fingertips. If you're passionate about deepening your understanding of aromatherapy through research, you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay connected with our latest sessions. We appreciate your curiosity, your time, and your commitment to learning.